I told him about this movie with 3 stories in it, each one of them random, but wait till the end. The first story is about the king and queen of the kingdom called Long Trellis. Local people knew them to be the most perfect couple, although in reality the queen contracted a rare disease and thus gave her barrenness. The disease makes the queen's emotions unstable. For the sake of his beloved wife, the king had tried some alternative medicine, from traditional medicine to modern medicine, but the result was nothing. For the sake of healing, the king would throw parties and invite circus performers, and there was in the middle of the art scene as one of the pregnant players, see the jealous queen and go to her room, going through her things, so he was always there to calm her down. Shortly thereafter, a witch who barged in and said she could cure Her Majesty's disease. The king was quite skeptical because none of the experts had previously been able to do it, but the wizard was convinced that he had studied the universe, where balance is the key. If the queen is to bear children, then there must be lives to be sacrificed and nature must be kept in balance. As crazy as it sounds, the queen asks that we at least try the witch's methods. The king's first step was to take the heart of the sea monster, where he would prepare his tools and dive in and watch the sea monster fall asleep. Without a doubt he planted his sword, but it just scratched the sea monster. The king struggled down there and was badly wounded. The king had finally succeeded in ripping out the monster's heart even at the cost of his life. It appears that the queen did not care much for her husband's death. She then wrapped the heart over it to be brought to the palace and cooked by the virgin servant. When boiling the water suddenly felt her stomach dilated as if she were pregnant. After the meal, the queen devoured it. Long story short, the child conceived by the queen and the servant born at the same time. The queen's son Elias and the servant's child is named Jonah. 16 years later, the queen lived happily ever after with her grown-up son Elias. Meanwhile, Jonah was living with her mother in the royal barn. Though their mothers were different, they looked like twins with an especially white skin and hair, like the appearance of a sea monster. These same physical traits remain inseparable. Their closeness undoubtedly met with the queen, as Elias often spent time with Jonah, feeling that her happiness was being taken away. The selfish queen threatened the attendant and begged him to stay away from her, even though Elias and Jonah had been forbidden to see each other in secret. One day the queen noticed that Elias was wearing Jonah's clothing, and the attendant and Jonah were expelled from the kingdom. Elias tried to stop them but failed. Before going to Jonah, plant a knife in a tree that would later become a source of water. As long as this water is clear, Jonah is healthy, and if it turns red, then she should be in danger. Since the Jonah departure, Elias has been scrambling the pool and suddenly the water turns red. Elias, who realizes Jonah is in danger, goes to her without telling her. He reached a town, where a woman called him. Apparently the woman was his wife Jonah. She thought Elias was her husband. Elias said that he was looking for his twin brother, but Jonas has been missing for 5 days since he was last seen going into the woods. As a result, Elias hurried to Jonah. Meanwhile, in the palace of the queen, who realized her son had disappeared, began to worry, at last, that she was back to see the witch. If the queen wants her child back, then another life will have to be sacrificed. The queen will finally surrender and follow the witch. A cave says Jonah was trapped there with a body full of wounds. No one knows why she was there. But soon there were abnormal shaped bats that tried to attack her. Frightened, Jonah cried out, and Elias, hearing her cry, promptly killed the bat with his sword, unaware that it was his mother's. A life for the life. The first story concludes with Elias as king. The second story tells of a mad king after his wife died. She had a child named Violet whom she never loved, and one day the mad king saw a small blood-sucking insect bite his hand. Instead of being scratched, instead of being let it go, and decided to put it in a box glass. Day by day the king became more and more obsessed with the insect, even letting it suck its blood out whenever it was hungry. Years went by and his beloved insect grew larger. Just as Violet now grows into a beautiful woman. Violet dreamed that one day she would marry and live happily. Long story short, the king's beloved insect suddenly died, and in search of a replacement he scalped the animal. She told Violet she was going to find him on one condition. The candidate had to tell her the name of the animal with the insect skin. Her father's proposal upset Violet. Because she did not want an arranged marriage, it was sadly the king's absolute decision. The candidates arrived. One by one of them started to look at and read the skins, but nobody knew because they had never seen one of these. But of the many men, a bald, tall man kissed the skin and told the king the name of the animal. Not only that, he also promised that one day he would bring the insect to the king. Knowing that her future husband was so ugly, Violet went up to the roof of the palace and tried to jump, but the king came and calmed her down. She said that the king and queen must keep their promise to the people because if they hadn't done so, then the title of king and queen was nothing. When Violet was forced to agree to her father's request, she was going to be queen one day. Then, after she married, Violet now lives with her husband in a cave surrounded by cliffs, but Violet refused to sleep with him, but he recognized her. Day after day Violet felt her life was miserable, not a day without weeping and continuing to grieve. Her husband tried to comfort her by bringing her raw meat that only made matters worse. While her husband was hunting, Violet saw a woman standing at the edge of a cliff near the cave, screaming for her to save him, but she refused because there was nothing she could do. Violet started screaming and kept pleading while explaining that she was the kidnapped princess. The next day the woman who had come back with her family, they threw a rope and tried to free Violet from her position when he tried to escape accidentally to see her taken and think Violet was kidnapped, but unfortunately the rope was broken and she fell. When Violet's trip celebrated her Independence Day, her husband suddenly appeared and attacked those who she thought were her captors. After each of the kidnappers died, Violet hugged her, and she pretended to care and thank her. And afterward Violet went to the palace with her husband's head in front of him. He said, "Is this the man you chose?" Seeing this, the king wept, regretting for turning his beautiful daughter into a monster. And so an innocent citizen falls victim to his son's anger. The second story concludes with Violet now crowned queen without a king present. Moving on to the last story, it tells of a king who lived a rich life but whose life was empty and he became addicted to alcohol and seduced by girls. Years of yearning for a sincere companion in life. The scene continued with two twin sisters named Dora and Lima. Dora was known for being a good liar and Lima tended to be naive. At an age when they are not young, they have never felt stroked by a man yet believe that one day they will surely come a man who loves them for who they are. Then one morning the king heard the voice of the woman singing so beautifully, apparently coming from the house of Dora and Lima. The king entered the house in his mind, the voice coming from the young woman in good looks, Lima trying to tell the king that they were not what they had expected, but Dora stopped Lima and in the end they chose to talk through the door. After a lengthy discussion Dora asked the king to give them 1 week to beautify themselves. The king did as Dora requested. The next day Dora and Lima made a special effort to look as young and beautiful as Ritu. Dora scrubbed her fingers with an herbal paste and wrapped them but without success, while Lima stuck the fingers in her mouth and sucked them away, and it worked. A week passed and the king demanded the pledge. Dora cleverly displayed Lima's finger through the hole in the door. This smoothness of the finger astonished the king. He kissed him repeatedly, telling him that he had found his mate, but the king's sincerity made them even more anxious, as they had deceived him. If they're exposed, their lives could be at stake. Dora then offered the king an offer of betting the king if all the lights in the palace were turned off. After the king left, Dora asked Lima to glue her wispy bark back together. Then at night the palace guards turned off all the lights. When the night fell, the king realized he had slept with an old lady. The angry king then ordered his guards to throw Dora from the palace window. Luckily, Dora survived after being stuck on a twig, and when Dora was unconscious, the witch came to touch Dora. This touch her skin taut, her hair turning red and making it easy to return. During the day the king went into the forest to hunt and he saw a beautiful girl who made him fall in love. The unknown king took Dora to the palace to be beetle red, and he threw a party to welcome the new queen. Dora was warmly greeted by her lovelies. Also Dora told her guards to invite Lima to her wedding. When she got to the palace of Lima by Dora, still an unbeliever, Lima asked for secrets to look as glamorous as Dora. Dora blabbered and told me that her secret was scalping her old skin. The naive Lima responded to her suggestion. Lima immediately sought out the man who had skinned his body. At first he refused, but after paying her off with a bracelet he finally agreed. Then this guy takes Lima into the forest. There's Lima skinned alive. The scene continued where Lima was again seen heading toward the palace with a frickin' body, and she eventually died before reaching the palace, while Dora, who was with the king, noticed her hands start to wrinkles, and the scene was closed with Dora, who had become her old self. As expected, the three stories actually have something in common, which is telling the story of each character's journey of finding happiness. The irony is that none of them succeeded in finding the one thing that made him happy. Finding happiness is actually easy, with gratitude and without comparing it with the lives of others.